The night my family voted me out, I was wearing a $4,200 Loro Piana cashmere sweater, and not one of them had the decency to look me in the eye when they did it. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I grew up believing the Callaway name meant something, not just the money, though God knows there was plenty of that, but the weight of it, the way people in Newport Beach stepped aside when my grandfather, Edmund Callaway Sr., walked into a room. The way maitre d's at Nobu and Pelican Hill didn't even bother handing him a menu because they already knew. I grew up thinking that kind of power protected you. I grew up stupid. My name is Madison Callaway, and I am the only blood Callaway left at that table. I just didn't know it yet. But here's what I did know that November Thursday. My cousin Sloane had been planning this moment for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. I found that out later. That night, I just thought it was another one of her little games, the kind she'd been running since we were teenagers, sharing a beach house in Laguna, since she started borrowing my clothes and my friends, and eventually my life. Sloane Hartley. She kept her mother's maiden name even after Aunt Patricia married into ours, had a talent for making you feel like you were imagining things, like the ground under your feet was slightly tilted and only you could feel it. Therapists call it gaslighting. Sloane called it just being honest, Madison. God, why are you always so sensitive? We were at my grandfather's estate in Pelican Crest, 14,000 square feet of travertine floors and ocean views that would make a grown man cry. Edmund had hosted Thanksgiving there every year since 1987, which meant this particular table had seen 37 years of Callaway family theater. Turkey carved by a private chef, wine poured by a sommelier named Terrence, who had worked for my grandfather since before I was born. And this year, apparently, a little coup d'etat tucked between the cranberry sauce and the pumpkin soufflé. I noticed it first in the way they were seated. Sloane had reorganized the seating arrangement. She'd taken over hosting duties from my grandfather 2 years ago when he started having what the family carefully referred to as his moments. She put herself at the head of the table nearest the window. She put me at the far end, near the kitchen, between my Uncle Ray's new wife, Bethany, who'd been in the family for 8 months and already acted like she'd built the house herself, and my cousin Porter, who was 26 and had never held a job and thought cryptocurrency was a personality trait. The first sign something was wrong, nobody made eye contact with me during the appetizer course, not once. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd been in therapy for 2 years, good therapy, the kind that costs $380 an hour in Newport Beach, and Dr. Navarro had spent a lot of that time helping me recognize when I was catastrophizing versus when my gut was actually right. My gut had been right about my ex-husband. My gut had been right about the business partner who tried to cut me out of my own real estate development firm. My gut, it turned out, had a near-perfect record track. But family with Callaway felt like the one place I still let myself be soft, still let myself be the little girl who believed in the Callaway name. And so I poured a glass of Chateau Pichon Baron, told my gut to take a breath, and smiled at Bethany when she asked if I'd done something different with my hair. I hadn't done anything different with my hair.
The meal moved the way those meals always moved, heavily, with a kind of performative warmth that required effort from everyone and felt genuine from no one. My Uncle Raymond talked about his portfolio, Porter talked about some NFT project he was getting into with some guys from Miami, and I had to press my nails into my palm to keep from saying anything. Sloane held court at her end of the table, laughing at everything just a half second too loud, touching her husband Garrett's arm in that way she'd always touched the things she wanted people to notice she owned. Garrett Renshaw, orthopedic surgeon, beautiful in the way that expensive, empty things are beautiful. He smiled at me once across the table, and I looked away first, which I'd been doing for 2 years now, ever since I figured out what he and Sloane actually were. But that particular secret, Garrett's secret, the one that would eventually blow this entire family wide open, that wasn't the one that came out on Thanksgiving. No,
What came out on Thanksgiving was so much worse. My grandfather sat at his traditional seat, not the head, because Sloane had claimed that, but at the center of the long side, his preferred spot, because he could see everyone from there. Edmund Calloway Sr. was 81 years old and built like a man who survived things that would flatten other people. He'd grown up with nothing in Bakersfield, built his first commercial property at 29 with a loan he talked a small bank into giving him, and had spent the next 50 years turning that into a real estate empire that stretched from San Diego to Portland. He wore a navy blazer to Thanksgiving dinner because he said holidays deserved respect. He'd been saying that since I was 7. He'd been quiet all through dinner, quieter than usual, even accounting for his moments. I kept glancing at him from my exile seat at the far end. Something about the set of his jaw, something about the way his eyes tracked Sloane when she moved around the table, filling people's glasses, laughing that laugh. I should have known then. I should have known something was coming. Instead, I watched Sloane tap her fork against her crystal glass like she was about to give a wedding toast, and my stomach dropped straight through the travertine floor. "Before dessert," she said, standing up, "I want to do something a little different this year." Her voice was the one she used for presentations. She'd gotten her MBA from USC, which she mentioned approximately every 45 minutes. "I've been thinking a lot about what this family means, what it stands for, and I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who's really been showing up for us, for Grandpa, for the legacy." She paused and let her gaze sweep the table and stop deliberately on me. "And who hasn't?" I set my wine glass down very carefully. "We took a vote," she continued, and I watched the faces around the table, Uncle Ray nodding, Bethany trying not to smile, Porter looking at his phone, and we've decided, as a family, that some relationships have become— she tilted her head like she was thinking of the right word, like she hadn't rehearsed this 40 times— toxic for everyone. She looked right at me. "Madison, we voted, and you're no longer family." Here is what happened inside my body in the 3 seconds after she said that. My vision went crystalline at the edges, the way it does right before you cry or right before you black out, and I couldn't tell which one was coming. My hands were completely still in my lap. I was aware of the sound of the ocean through the window. The estate was close enough to the bluff that you could hear it on quiet nights, and I thought, randomly, stupidly, Edmund built this house for my grandmother. I thought, my grandmother is buried 40 feet from this table, and her granddaughter is being voted out of the family like a contestant on a reality show. Then someone laughed. I don't know who laughed first. It rippled. Sloane was already pulling out her phone. "Come on," she said, with the kind of warm mockery that's designed to make you feel like you're overreacting. "It's not that serious, Maddie. We're taking a photo, family photo. Just maybe sit this one out." They crowded together at Sloane's end of the table, 14 people, pressing their cheeks together, angling their chins, doing the thing that people do when they perform happiness for an audience of strangers. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to stand. I pushed my chair back, and the sound of it on the travertine was very loud. And then I was walking toward the hallway, and nobody called after me. And that silence was the part that cracked something open in my chest. And then my grandfather's voice cut across the entire room like a blade. "Put the phone down, Sloane." I stopped walking. The sound of laughter evaporated. I heard it go. I heard the room change, and I turned around slowly because some part of me already knew that whatever came next was going to rewrite everything. Edmund Calloway Sr. was standing, both hands flat on the table, the way he stood in negotiations when he was done being polite. Terrence had materialized silently near the sideboard the way good staff do when they sense a shift in weather. My grandfather looked at Sloane, and then he looked at me, and his voice was very quiet and completely steady. "She's the only one at this table who shares my blood. The rest of you should remember who built the house you're sitting in before you vote anyone out of anything." Dead silence.
Sloane's smile didn't fall, it froze. There is a difference, and I want you to understand that difference because it's important. A smile that falls means someone has been surprised. A smile that freezes means someone has been caught. And in the 3 seconds that her expression locked in place, I understood that whatever my grandfather had just said, Sloane had known it was possible. She had been afraid of exactly this. She had planned around it. And somewhere, somehow, the plan had failed. "Grandpa," she said in her careful voice, the one she used when she was course-correcting, "you've had a long day. Maybe we should— I'll tell you what we should do." He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "We should call Franklin first thing tomorrow morning, because I've made some decisions about the estate documents that I believe are overdue." Franklin was his estate attorney, had been for 22 years. The room went so quiet I could hear the ocean again. I drove home that night on Pacific Coast Highway with the windows down even though it was 54 degrees in late November, and the cold felt like something I needed. I live in Corona Del Mar, 12 minutes from my grandfather's estate in good traffic, 7 if you push it on PCH. My house is a Cape Cod style, 4 bedrooms, sits on a canyon lot with a view that my ex-husband's attorney tried very hard to get him half of during our divorce. He didn't get it. I kept the house, kept the business, kept my sanity by the thinnest possible margin, and I'd spent the 2 years since making myself into something that couldn't be moved.
Except tonight, I was shaking. I sat in my driveway for 11 minutes without getting out of the car. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on my dash. I was doing the thing Dr. Navarro taught me, sitting inside a feeling without immediately running from it or strategizing around it. And what I felt was this. I was not surprised. That was the thing gutting me open on my leather seat at 9:47 on Thanksgiving night. Not the cruelty of it, not the humiliation. The fact that some part of me had seen it coming for months and had not let myself believe it, because believing it would have required me to accept that every person at that table, every person I had shared holidays and vacations and hospital waiting rooms with, had looked at me and made a choice. The question eating through me like acid: what did Sloane know about me? What had she told them? And why now did my grandfather look at her like he'd caught her at something she'd thought was buried? My phone had 23 texts by the time I got inside. Most of them were from people who had been at that table, the performative ones, the "hey, are you okay" texts that people send when they want credit for caring without the inconvenience of actually caring. One was from my cousin Nadia, who was the only one at that table I actually trusted, and it said, "Call me when you're home, I need to tell you something, and I should have told you months ago." I stood in my kitchen in my $4,200 cashmere sweater, and I called Nadia. She answered before the second ring. "Sloane has been meeting with Franklin," she said before I could even speak. "She's been meeting with him privately for almost a year, and Maddie, she's been telling Grandpa you don't want the estate, that you've been saying you'd rather have the cash buyout and walk away, that you told her you don't care about the legacy." The kitchen was very still. "I never said that," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, which meant I was furious enough that the fury had looped all the way around into ice. "I know you didn't." Nadia's voice cracked on the last word. "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. She told me if I said anything, she'd make sure Garrett knows about— It doesn't matter. The point is she was using it to keep me quiet, and I let her. And I'm sorry, Madison. I'm so sorry." I held the phone and looked at the dark window over my kitchen sink and thought about 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Thought about Sloane at the head of the table. Thought about the way my grandfather had said, "She's the only one who shares my blood," and the way Sloane's smile had frozen rather than fallen. "Nadia," I said, "what does Garrett know about you?" Long pause. "I need you to promise me something first," she said. "Tell me." Another pause, and in it I heard her making a decision. "6 months ago," she said slowly, "I was at Montage for dinner, the bar, not the restaurant, and I saw Garrett." She stopped. "He wasn't with Sloane." My blood pressure did something complicated. "Who was he with?" "A man named Prescott Landry," she said. "He's an attorney, estate and probate. He doesn't work for our family, and they were looking at documents together, Madison, physical documents, and Garrett saw me and he went completely white. And 2 days later, Sloan pulled me aside and said if I ever mentioned seeing Garrett anywhere, she'd make sure certain things about my personal life came out in a way that would cost me my job. I sat down on my kitchen stool. Garrett Renshaw, successful orthopedic surgeon, beautiful, empty man, Sloane's carefully chosen husband, was meeting privately with an estate attorney who had no connection to the Calloway family, which meant one of two things. Either Garrett was helping Sloane build a case, or Garrett was building one of his own. "Get some sleep," I told Nadia. "Don't talk to anyone. Not Sloane, not anyone at that table. I'll call you tomorrow." "Madison, what are you going to do?" I looked at my own reflection in the dark window. Cashmere sweater, steady eyes. A woman who had survived a divorce designed to flatten her. A business partner who'd tried to steal 7 years of her work, and 34 years of being the family member who was too much and not enough simultaneously. "I'm going to find out," I said, "exactly what's been buried in this family, and then I'm going to decide what to do with the shovel." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying, I was past crying, but because my brain wouldn't stop pulling at the thread my grandfather had handed me across that dinner table. She's the only one who shares my blood. Not, she's the only one I love most. Not, she's family, treat her right. He said blood, specifically, with Sloane standing right there, and Sloane's smile had frozen. I got up at 4 a.m. and made coffee and opened my laptop and started with what I knew. My grandfather had 2 children, my father, Edmund Jr., who died in a sailing accident off Catalina Island when I was 19, and my Aunt Patricia, Sloane's mother, who was currently living in a wellness center in Sedona that cost $18,000 a month and was delicately referred to as Patricia's sabbatical. My father had me, Patricia had Sloane. Technically equal branches of the family tree, except my grandfather had just said Sloane didn't share his blood, which meant one of 3 things. Either Patricia wasn't his, or Sloane wasn't Patricia's, or there was a branch of this tree none of us had ever been shown. By 6 a.m., I had a legal pad with 3 columns and a headache that no amount of intelligentsia pour-over was touching. By 7 a.m., I had called my own attorney, Diane Cho, who has an office in Newport Beach and a reputation that makes opposing counsel visibly uncomfortable, and left her a message asking for an urgent meeting. By 8 a.m., I had done something I hadn't done in 4 years. I drove to see my grandfather. The estate was different in the morning, quieter. The catering staff had cleared everything out overnight. Edmund used a service that came at midnight like culinary elves and left no trace, and the house had returned to its usual careful grandeur. Terrence let me in. He looked at me for a moment in the doorway and said, "He's in the library, Miss Calloway. He asked me to watch for you." He'd asked Terrence to watch for me. My grandfather, who sometimes forgot what year it was, who had moments that we carefully never named, had asked his sommelier to watch for me at the front door. The library was my favorite room in the house. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, a fireplace big enough to stand in, 2 leather chairs angled toward each other in front of it. My grandmother had decorated it, and then she had died young, 53, aneurysm, on a Tuesday morning in 1999. And my grandfather had not changed a single thing about that room in 25 years. He was in his usual chair. He was wearing the same blazer. He looked at me when I came in, and I looked at him, and we skipped the part where people say good morning and how are you, because neither of us had ever been particularly good at small talk. "You knew what you were going to say last night," I told him. I sat in the chair across from him. "That wasn't a moment. You've been waiting." He nodded once, slow. "I owe you a conversation I should have had years ago." "Grandpa," I leaned forward, "what did you mean when you said I was the only one who shares your blood?" He looked at the fireplace for a long moment. When he looked back at me, his eyes were completely clear, clearer than they'd been in years, and what I saw in them was not confusion. What I saw was guilt. "Your Aunt Patricia," he said carefully, is not my biological daughter. Your grandmother and I," he paused, "we went through a very hard time in the early 1960s, a separation. I won't dress it up more than that. When your grandmother came back, she was pregnant. We never spoke of it directly. We chose each other again, and I raised Patricia as my own, and I loved her. I still do." The fire made soft sounds. "But Sloane," I said slowly, "Sloane would know, or suspect, or—" "Sloane's mother found documents," he said. "Letters from a time before your grandmother and I reconciled. Patricia found them in this house, years ago, and then she told Sloane." He met my eyes. "And Sloane has spent the last year using that information to try to establish that she is the sole legitimate family heir, that you, as the child of my biological son, should be managed out." The word managed hit me like cold water. "I said she told Franklin I didn't want the estate." "She told Franklin several things," he said. "Franklin told me all of them, last week." His chin lifted. "Franklin has worked for me for 22 years. He is loyal to me, not to whoever is making appointments to rearrange my legacy." I thought about Sloane's frozen smile. I thought about Garrett at the Montage Bar with an estate attorney named Prescott Landry looking at documents. I thought about Nadia, blackmailed into silence. I thought about 11 months of maneuvering, of playing long games while I went to therapy and rebuilt my company and thought the family drama was merely background noise. It hadn't been background noise. It had been a carefully constructed demolition of my entire inheritance, my standing, and my grandfather's understanding of who I was, and it had been running the entire time I was looking the other direction. "She almost pulled it off," I said quietly. "She is very intelligent," my grandfather said, without apology. "She gets that from Patricia, and Patricia got it from her father, whoever he was." He looked at me steadily. "But she made one mistake." "What mistake?" "She assumed," he said, "that I was too far gone to notice." I looked at my grandfather, 81 years old, built like a survivor, blazer on at 8 a.m. because holidays, and apparently also family warfare deserved respect, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not quite. Something sharper and more useful than relief. Because here is what Sloane had not counted on. I hadn't just been sitting across from her at that Thanksgiving table. I had been watching her for 2 years. I had been watching Garrett for 2 years. And I had, tucked in the Notes app of my phone and in 3 encrypted files on a hard drive in my home office, things that Sloane would very much prefer stayed buried. She'd chosen Thanksgiving to make her move, theatrical, public, designed to humiliate me in front of the entire family in a way that would be hard to recover from, that would color every interaction going forward, that would make me look unstable if I protested too hard. She'd used the table like a stage. What she hadn't considered was that I'd been building my own stage for 24 months. Mine just wasn't set up yet. "I need to ask you something," I told my grandfather, "and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not protective, not gentle, just honest. All right?
You have a plan, he said. It wasn't a question. I have the beginning of one, I said. And somewhere across Newport Beach, in a $3.8 million home on Orchid Avenue that my grandfather's money had helped Sloane's husband purchase, two people who thought they had already won were waking up and making coffee and had absolutely no idea that the only real Callaway at that Thanksgiving table had just started playing the game they thought they'd finished. There is a specific kind of calm that settles over you when you have decided, completely and without ambiguity, that you are done being the person things happen to. I want you to understand that when I walked out of my grandfather's library that Friday morning after Thanksgiving, I was not angry in the way people expect a woman to be angry, messy, reactive, loud enough to dismiss. I was the other kind of angry. The kind that wakes up at 5 a.m. and writes lists. The kind that makes phone calls before business hours and speaks to attorneys in complete, organized sentences. The kind that Sloane Hartley had spent 11 months underestimating, which was the single most expensive mistake she would ever make in her life, and she didn't know it yet. I drove back to Corona Del Mar and I showered and I changed into wool trousers and a silk blouse and I sat at my dining room table with my legal pad and I mapped out everything I knew and everything I needed to know and what the gap between those two things was going to cost me to close. Here is what I knew. Sloane had spent nearly a year repositioning herself as the Callaway family's sole legitimate heir by feeding my grandfather's attorney a narrative in which I was indifferent, unstable, and disengaged. She had used the existence of a 60-year-old secret, my grandmother's affair, Patricia's true parentage, to argue that my branch of the family tree was the only one carrying actual Callaway blood, and that this should mean something legally. She had done this while simultaneously orchestrating a social campaign to isolate me within the family, which culminated in a Thanksgiving dinner designed to publicly humiliate me in front of 14 witnesses. Here is what I needed to know. What was Garrett Renshaw doing at the Montage Bar with a probate attorney named Prescott Landry? Because here is the thing about Sloane that I'd learned over 34 years of watching her operate. She didn't trust anyone completely, not even her husband, especially not her husband. Sloane ran parallel operations the way some people run multiple browser tabs, always something going in the background that the other windows couldn't see. And Garrett, beautiful, empty Garrett, with his surgical hands and his country club ease, had always struck me as the kind of man who understood exactly what he'd married into and had his own contingency plans accordingly. Nadia called me at 9 a.m. I answered on the first ring. "I need to tell you everything," she said. "I should have before. I'm done letting her have anything over me." "Start with Prescott Landry," I said. Nadia took a breath.
Prescott Landry does estate and probate litigation. He's known for contesting wills, specifically. There was a big case in Pasadena 3 years ago where he got his second wife cut out of her husband's estate on a technicality involving the husband's capacity at the time of signing. She paused. Garrett introduced himself to Prescott at a charity event last spring. I know this because Prescott's associate is someone I know personally. She told me after everything happened with Sloan threatening me because she knew something was off. I was already writing. Garrett hired Prescott, not Sloan. Garrett hired Prescott independently, and based on what my contact said, the conversations weren't about protecting Sloan's position. They were about Garrett's. Another pause, and in the gap, I heard Nadia working up to something. Madison, I think Garrett is planning to divorce Sloan, and I think he's been building a case to ensure that when he does, he walks away with a significant portion of whatever she's inherited. I stopped writing. I sat back in my chair. Sloan had spent a year trying to take everything from me, and the entire time, the man sleeping next to her had been building a case to take everything from Sloan. The poetry of it was almost beautiful. Almost. Nadia, I said, how solid is your contact? How much does she actually know? She's seen documents, she said. Not all of them, but enough. Garrett's been having conversations with Prescott about what triggers an inheritance claim in California if a marriage ends within 3 years of a significant estate transfer. Her voice dropped. He's been timing this, Madison. He married Sloan 2.5 years ago. I thought about the timeline, the estate documents my grandfather needed to update, the changes Sloan was pushing for, the inheritance transfer she was trying to engineer. If those transfers went through and then Garrett filed within a certain window, he's waiting for Sloan to win, I said slowly, so he can take half of what she wins. That's what it looks like. So here is what we actually had under all of Sloan's careful staging. A woman who had built an 11-month operation to steal a family legacy, married to a man who had built an 18-month operation to steal it from her. A con inside a con, a betrayal inside a betrayal. And somewhere in the middle, my grandfather's estate, my grandmother's 60-year-old secret, and me, the only actual Calloway at the table, sitting on information that could dismantle both of them simultaneously if I used it correctly. I called Diane at 9:30. She answered, which meant my 7 a.m. voicemail had communicated the appropriate urgency. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her everything. It took 40 minutes and 2 cups of coffee, and by the end of it, there was a silence on the line that meant Diane was doing what Diane did, which was taking a complex situation and reducing it to its structural components. "Okay," she said finally, "here's what you have. You have an elderly client whose estate planning has been actively manipulated by a family member using fraudulent representations to his attorney of record. That's significant. You have a husband who appears to be engaged in a conspiracy to defraud that same family member using a state litigation strategy, and you have a family member who's been coerced into silence through what sounds like explicit blackmail." "Yes," I said. "And your grandfather is lucid enough to support your account? His moments?" "He was completely lucid this morning," I said. "And Franklin, his attorney, will corroborate that Sloan was making representations to him about my wishes that were demonstrably false. She told him I wanted a cash buyout. I have 7 years of business emails, public statements, and documented decisions that show I have never expressed anything remotely like that." "She built her whole case on a lie," Diane said. "She built her whole case on a lie," I confirmed. "Give me until Monday," she said. "I want to talk to Franklin directly, with your grandfather's permission, before we make any moves. And Madison, don't contact Sloan. Don't contact Garrett. Don't tell anyone in that family except Nadia what you know or what you're doing. Let them believe it's business as usual." "They think they've already won," I said. "Good," said Diane. "Let them keep thinking that." I spent that weekend doing something that probably looked from the outside like nothing. I went to the farmer's market in Corona del Mar on Saturday morning. I had brunch with a friend on Sunday. I responded to the performative "Are you okay?" texts from the Thanksgiving table with breezy, unbothered messages that suggested I had shaken off the previous Thursday the way someone shakes off a bad hair day. I liked a photo of Sloane's on Instagram. I sent Porter a neutral text about some unrelated family logistics matter. What I was actually doing was building a record. Every interaction, time-stamped and saved. Every normal, unbothered thing I did that could later demonstrate that I hadn't been spiraling, hadn't been reactive, had simply been living my life while gathering information. Dr. Navarro had once told me that the most powerful position to be in, legally and emotionally, was the one where your behavior was completely unimpeachable in retrospect. I'd been in this position before, in my divorce, in the business dispute, and I knew how to hold it. You hold it by doing exactly what you'd be doing anyway, except slightly more documented. Diane called me Monday at 8 a.m. "I spoke with Franklin," she said. "He's prepared to give a full account of every communication he had with Sloane, including the representations she made about your preferences and intentions. He kept notes, detailed ones. I could hear the particular quality of satisfaction in her voice that meant the notes were very good." She told him on 3 separate occasions between January and September that you had expressed to her directly that you wanted to liquidate your interest in the estate and that you were planning to move abroad within the next 2 years. "I have never expressed any of those things," I said, "to anyone, ever." "I know. It's demonstrably false. Your entire business operation is here. Your property is here. You have never publicly or privately indicated any intention to liquidate anything." She paused. "More importantly, your grandfather never asked you directly because Sloane told him it would be too painful for you to discuss. She positioned herself as the one managing your stated wishes on your behalf." I was quiet for a moment. The architecture of it was genuinely impressive. Sloane had positioned herself as my advocate, telling Franklin she was protecting my feelings, telling my grandfather she was managing my stated wishes, while systematically destroying my standing. She built herself a role that gave her access and moral cover simultaneously. If anyone had confronted her, she could have pointed to her care for me as the explanation for every conversation she had had. It was the most sophisticated gaslighting I had ever encountered, and I had encountered some sophisticated gaslighting. "Garrett, what about Prescott Landry?"
That, said Diane, with a different quality entirely, is where it gets interesting. What Diane had found through her own contacts and Nadia's information and a very productive conversation with Prescott Landry's former associate, who had since left his firm, was this. Garrett Renshaw had retained Prescott Landry not just for divorce strategy, but to explore something considerably more aggressive. There were notes, the associate had kept them, out of what she described as genuine discomfort with what she'd been asked to research, indicating that Garrett had asked Prescott to look into the legal concept of testamentary capacity challenges, meaning the ability to argue, after a death or during estate proceedings, that the person making the will had not been mentally capable of doing so. He had been building a case to challenge my grandfather's mental capacity. He had been planning to let Sloane get the inheritance and then use her, my grandfather's family, our private information about Edmund's moments, all of it, to challenge the will and extract a settlement. He would have used our family's love and worry for my grandfather as a weapon against us. I took a very slow breath. "Can we prove it?" I said. "We have the notes, which are from a source who is willing to speak on record," she said, "and we have phone records, subpoenable if this goes anywhere near litigation, that would establish the relationship between Garrett and Prescott and the timeline. Yes, we can prove it." She paused. "The question is what you want to do with this, because you have options, Madison, and some of them are public and some of them are private, and they lead to very different outcomes." I looked out my window at the canyon.
November in Southern California is still green, still improbably, unfairly beautiful. Walk me through all of them, I said. What I chose was not the loudest option. Diane had presented me with 3 paths, ranging from a full legal action that would be spectacular and public and damaging and slow, to a quiet settlement negotiation that would be fast and clean, and would require me to accept a version of the truth that never fully came to light. I chose neither. What I chose was the 3rd path, which Diane described as surgical, which was the word that made me say yes. The following Wednesday, Sloane received a letter, not from me, from Franklin, my grandfather's attorney, requesting her presence at the estate for what was described as a family estate planning update meeting at 3 p.m. Friday. She was told it would be brief. She was told to bring her husband. She brought Garrett. Of course she did. He was her proof of legitimacy, her anchor, her evidence that she had made something stable enough to inherit into. I was already there when they arrived. I was sitting in the library, my grandmother's library, with the bookshelves that hadn't moved since 1999, and when Sloane walked in and saw me, I watched her face do the calculation in real time. How much did I know? How much had my grandfather told me? Was this a trap, or was this coincidence? She went with breezy. She always went with breezy when she was scared. "Maddie," she said, warmly, like Thanksgiving had not happened. "I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk. I felt terrible about how that whole dinner got, how family stuff can just get so—"
"Sit down, Sloane," my grandfather said from his chair. She sat. Garrett sat beside her. He looked at me once and looked away. He was wearing the specific expression of a man who is very good at performing confidence and is currently running the performance at maybe 60% capacity. Franklin stood near the fireplace, very straight, the way attorneys stand when they are about to say something that will be very clearly remembered afterward. "I've asked you here today," my grandfather said, "because there are some things that need to be said in person, and because I believe in conducting difficult business face-to-face. It is a standard I have held my entire life, and I see no reason to abandon it now." Sloane's hand moved toward Garrett's. He didn't take it. She noticed. I noticed her notice. "Over the past several weeks," my grandfather continued, "I've become aware that certain representations were made to Franklin regarding my granddaughter Madison's intentions with respect to this family's estate. I've also become aware that these representations were false, made by you, Sloane, on multiple occasions." The breezy expression evaporated. "That's not—" she started. "Franklin has notes," he said, "dates and times, 3 separate conversations." He looked at her with something that was not anger and was not sadness, but was the specific quality of a man who has seen a great deal and is no longer surprised by any of it. "You are a very intelligent woman. I have always known that. But you made the same mistake intelligent people always make." "What mistake?" she said quietly. "You assumed," he said, "that you were the only one paying attention." Franklin stepped forward then and laid a document on the coffee table between them. "Mr. Calloway has made significant revisions to his estate documents," he said. "These revisions have been executed and witnessed and filed. They are not contestable." He said that last word with a particular precision that I saw land on Garrett's face like a physical thing. Not contestable. "Additionally, I am obligated to inform you that the legal team has become aware of consultations conducted by Garrett Renshaw with an attorney named Prescott Landry, the subject matter of which includes strategies for challenging Mr. Calloway's testamentary capacity." Garrett went completely still. "That documentation has been preserved," Franklin continued, in the same even tone, "and any future legal action along those lines will be met with a response that is fully prepared and resourced." The room had the specific texture of silence that happens when something has been destroyed and everyone present knows it. I let it sit for a moment. Then I stood up.
I want to tell you that I did something dramatic here, that I made a speech or raised my voice or gave Sloane the kind of confrontation that people in movies get, the one where everything is said and everyone understands and there is catharsis and applause. That is not what happened. What happened is I picked up my coffee and I walked to the bookshelf my grandmother had arranged and I straightened a book that didn't need straightening, and then I turned around. "I'm not angry at you," I told Sloane.
I said it because it was true, and true things tend to land harder than dramatic ones. I actually think you believed, at some level, that you deserved this more than I did. And maybe you worked harder for it. Maybe you were more strategic. But you built the whole thing on a lie about who I am and what I want. And you did it in a house that my grandmother decorated and that my grandfather built. And I think some part of you knew it would eventually come back to you, because it always does. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet and she was not going to let them go further than that. "Garrett's going to leave you," I said. Not unkindly, just factually. I think you probably know that already. And when he does, the estate changes will protect you from whatever he was planning. You should thank Franklin for the timing. I picked up my bag. But that protection stops at the family. What happens between you and him, that's yours. I walked to my grandfather's chair and I leaned down and I kissed him on the top of his head, the way I had since I was 7 years old, and he put his hand on my arm for a moment, and that was everything. That was the entire thing. I walked out of the library, through the travertine hallway, past Terrence, who held the front door open without being asked. The November air hit me full in the face. Canyon and ocean and the smell of eucalyptus from the grove my grandfather had planted in 1991. Nadia called me 3 hours later. "It's done," she said. She called me from the car. She's not okay, but she's not going to fight it." A pause. "Garrett left, like, immediately. He called a car from the estate and he left and he hasn't come back to the house." "I figured," I said. "Madison," her voice did something soft. "How did you stay that calm?" I thought about it. I thought about the Thanksgiving table and the frozen smile and the selfie and the sound of my chair on the travertine when I pushed it back and the ocean I could hear through the window and my grandfather's voice cutting across all of it like something structural, something load-bearing. "Because I wasn't doing it to hurt her," I said. "I was doing it to stop being hurt. There's a difference. It changes how it feels." The estate documents were formalized in December. My grandfather, in a move that surprised even Diane, had restructured things substantially, not in a way that excluded Sloane entirely because he was not a cruel man, and Patricia was still his daughter in every way that mattered, but in a way that made the truth of the family architecture visible and permanent. The primary stewardship of the Calloway estate, the properties, the trusts, the legacy infrastructure, passed to me, not because I was the only blood Calloway, though I was, because I was the one who had been there, the one who had shown up to the hard meetings and the hospital waiting rooms and the careful family dinners for 34 years, not to position myself, but because it was what you did. Sloane received a settlement, generous, honestly more generous than she'd earned, and the Newport Beach house and a portion of the trust, enough to be fine, enough to build something if she chose to. Garrett filed for divorce in January. Prescott Landry did not represent him. I heard through Diane that he'd found a different attorney, that the case was going to be contentious, that he was trying to argue common law interest in gifts received during the marriage. I heard this and I did not think about it very much because it was no longer my geometry. Nadia and I had lunch at Cannery Seafood in January, the Sunday kind of lunch that goes on for 3 hours and ends with dessert you didn't plan on. She told me she was thinking about moving, starting fresh, that Newport had started to feel like a costume she'd been wearing too long. I told her I understood completely. I told her the thing Dr. Navarro had told me once, which was that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to keep performing the life that other people built for you. "Is that what you're doing now?" she asked. "A different life?" I thought about it. My company was growing. I'd closed 2 significant commercial development deals in the fall, quietly, while the family drama was burning in the background. My grandfather and I had started having coffee on Tuesday mornings, just the 2 of us, in the library.
He was clearer than he'd been in years, which his doctor cautiously attributed to reduced stress, and which I privately attributed to the fact that Sloane was no longer in the house twice a week running her quiet interference. My house in Corona del Mar still had the canyon view. I had not moved abroad. I had not liquidated anything. "I'm not doing a different life," I told Nadia. "I'm just doing my actual one." Here is the thing about growing up with money that nobody who has money talks about honestly. It makes you think that the structures around you are solid. The house, the name, the table set for 14 every Thanksgiving, they feel like permanence. They feel like proof of something. And so when someone starts dismantling those structures quietly in the background while you're going to therapy and building your company and trying to be a functional adult, it takes a long time to realize that the ground is moving because you couldn't imagine that it could. Sloane understood that. She understood that I believed in the structures, and she used that belief against me. She was wrong about almost everything, about my grandfather, about what I wanted, about how close she'd actually gotten to pulling it off, but she wasn't wrong about that. I had believed in the table, in the name, in the Thanksgiving performance of family warmth that required effort from everyone and felt genuine from no one. I believed in it because I had wanted it to be real, and that is not a flaw. That is a woman who loved her family. That is not something I need to fix. What I fixed was the assumption that love was the same as safety, that belonging to people meant they wouldn't try to erase you, that the table being set and the turkey being carved and the wine being poured meant that everyone seated at it was actually on your side. My grandfather told me in February on a Tuesday morning over coffee that he'd been watching Sloane's operation build for longer than I knew, that he'd seen the first signs of it 18 months ago and had chosen to let it develop because, as he put it, I needed to know how far she would take it before I knew what I was dealing with. He had been in his 80s with his occasional moments of cloudiness, running his own long game, watching, waiting, choosing his moment. "You could have stopped it earlier," I said. "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you?" He looked at the fire. He looked at my grandmother's bookshelves. "Because I wanted you to have the chance to stop it yourself," he said. "I wanted to see what you would do with the shovel." I looked at him for a long moment. "That," I said, "is either the most loving thing you've ever done or the most ruthless." "In my experience," said Edmund Calloway Sr., who had built an empire from nothing and survived 60 years of family and loss and the specific cruelty of intelligent people making bad choices, those two things are very often the same. The Tuesday morning light came through the library windows the way it always did, catching the dust motes and the gold on the book spines, falling across the chairs that hadn't moved since 1999. Somewhere outside, the canyon was doing what canyons do, holding all of it, the old growth and the new, the things that had been there forever and the things that were just beginning. My name is Madison Calloway. I am the only blood Calloway at that table. I know it now, and so does everyone who matters. And the next Thanksgiving, there were 8 people at the table. My grandfather at the center, same blazer, same ocean view. Nadia, who had decided not to move after all. Terrence, who my grandfather had finally, after 22 years, invited to sit rather than pour. 3 of my grandfather's oldest friends, men who had known him since Bakersfield and didn't need to perform anything for anyone. And me, at the head of the table, because someone had to sit there, and it turned out I had always been the right person for the chair. We didn't take a selfie. We didn't need to. The people who needed to know we were family already knew it. The people who needed to prove it never actually were. The moral of this story isn't that blood is everything. It's that truth is the only inheritance worth fighting for, and the only one nobody can vote away from you.
Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.